After a tough 2023 that led to the Yankees' worst record in a full season since 1992, the most historic franchise in baseball got back to the World Series last year, crushing their way to the Fall Classic behind a 1-2 punch that is among the best in baseball history in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. Unfortunately, they lost one half of that 1-2 punch to their crosstown rival New York Mets. The Yankees did a lot this offseason to cover up that loss, going into 2025 with a very different roster than the one that they rolled out last season. Can a completely new dynamic on this Yankees roster bring them back to the World Series in 2025? Let's go into a deep dive on the 2025 New York Yankees organization. We'll get started with some team ranks from last season. These are all going to be completely objective. My rankings formula are going to be in the description of this video. And the Yankees came in with the 6th ranked Major League roster last year, but 4 units that were very solid across the board. A lineup that led the way, that ended top 5 in baseball last year, a very solid bullpen, a rotation led by Gerrit Cole that is unfortunately going to be missing the entire 2025 season, and a defense that, although didn't live up to expectations in some of the brightest moments, over a full 162 did have some very bright spots. To build this good of a roster, the Yankees did have to deplete their farm system just a little bit, coming in at 21st in my rankings, but they do have a pretty solid crop of minor league pitchers coming up and a few minor league hitters that will be contributing to this team very soon. Aaron Boone is the manager of this team. This is already going to be his 9th season here, 603 and 429 record with the Yankees. And then Brian Cashman in his 26th season as the general manager of this team, 19 playoff appearances on his belt. Last season, the Yankees were 94 and 68, first in the American League East and first in the American League, a big-time spender, $303 million on that 2024 payroll. Not projected to be as high this season, but they did still bring in a lot of guys this offseason. The PECOTA projection system, not a big fan of the Yankees roster this year, projecting them to be 85 and 77, actually missing the playoffs, 7th in the American League. I wouldn't take these projections as gospel if I were you. I just like to have it in here as kind of a baseline for what some of the models think about this team. They give them a 51.1% chance to make the playoffs this year. Unfortunately, in signing some of the guys they did this offseason, only one top 100 pick at 39, but when you have a loaded Major League roster like this, it's not as big of a deal. Their top contracts are Aaron Judge, kind of on a bargain deal at this point of his career. One of the best hitting seasons of all time by a right-handed hitter last year. Gerrit Cole, unfortunately, I mentioned, going to miss the entire season with Tommy John surgery on a $36 million contract, but they're getting some of it back in an insurance policy on the deal. Won't go super deep into details about that, but just know the Yankees are getting some money back to spend from that contract. And then Max Fried, $27.25 million brought in this offseason. Really a big signing for them after the injury to Gerrit Cole. Really going to help shore up that rotation and make it a lot deeper than it would have been without him. They made the playoffs last year. I mentioned went to the World Series, lost to the Dodgers. Their park factor, which is a number that shows how much of a hitter's or a pitcher's park that you play in, is at 100. 100 is league average. The Yankees have the 13th biggest hitting park in all of baseball. In terms of organization success, some pretty solid teams down there in the minors. 89 and 60 in Scranton last year. In AAA, really solid team there. AA, 75 and 62. High A, Hudson Valley Renegades, 73 and 58. Tough season for the Tampa Tarpons, 54 and 74. I mentioned a completely different roster this year, and we'll go into some of the additions here. Max Fried, the big one, the biggest contract ever given to a left-handed pitcher, 8 years, $218 million, projected over 3 WAR this season. Former National League MVP Cody Bellinger, center field guy. He's going to play mostly center field this year, but can play some first base if needed. Paul Goldschmidt brought in to play first base. Tough season last year, but 2 former MVPs here in Cody Bellinger and Paul Goldschmidt. The airbender Devin Williams brought in from my Milwaukee Brewers, 1.4 projected WAR for him next season, pretty much the best closer in the game by most metrics. Fernando Cruz, really underrated reliever, excited to get into him later. Carlos Carrasco gonna open up the season in the rotation as the 5 starter, and then Ryan Yarbrough, a buzzer beater contract here, 1 year, $2 million. A bunch of subtractions from this team. Juan Soto, the big one, 8.1 WAR in 2024, going over to the Mets. Nestor Cortez in that trade with prospect Caleb Durbin for Devin Williams. Gleyber Torres over to the Tigers. Jose Trevino over to Cincinnati this offseason in a trade. Clay Holmes going to be the opening day starter for the Mets after being the closer for this team last year. Alex Verdugo just signed a deal with Atlanta, and then Tommy Kahnle over to Detroit. A pretty big group of additions and subtractions for this team. Before I go into specifics here, I'll go over weighted runs created plus really quickly. Think about it as a general offensive stat that measures your entire productivity at the plate. League average for that is going to be 100. Everything above or below it is going to be the percent better or worse that you were as a hitter compared to league average in that season. So for example, Austin Wells projected to be 6% better than the league average hitter next year, and we'll get started there. Really solid catcher. Pretty tough bookend months for him last year. The April got off to a tough start and a bad September, but a very good middle of the season. Really like him as a catcher here. The big man himself, Aaron Judge, the best hitter in baseball, projected to be 77% better than league average. 49 homers, by far the most in this projection system. 7.4 WAR for him on the projections this year. Cody Bellinger projected to be 14% better than league average. A 23-12 season for him and 3 WAR. Paul Goldschmidt expected to take a big step forward after a tough 2024 season. Jazz Chisholm, really excited for a full season here for him in the Bronx. Projected 27 homers and 35 stolen bases. Anthony Volpe, a very solid defender, but been below a league average hitter both of his years in the majors. Projected to be about league average this year. Jasson Dominguez, the rookie on this team, projected 13% better than league average, 20 homers and 23 stolen bases. Ben Rice, big-time minor league numbers, came up last year and struggled a little bit, projected to be 13% better than league average. And then Oswaldo Cabrera, currently penciled in at third base, but a big-time utility bat that can really play anywhere, projected to be a bit below league average. On the bench, JC Escarra going to make this team, 0.4 WAR on the projections. Oswald Peraza also in that third base battle. Pablo Reyes, big-time lefty hitter, and then Trent Grisham, a really solid outfielder and a left-handed bat. Getting into this projected rotation, already a couple big losses here with Garrett Cole going down for the entire season and Luis Gil suffering an injury, gonna miss a majority of the year, it sounds like. Not exactly sure when he'll be back, but I expect him to contribute to this rotation at some point. We'll just get started here though with Carlos Rodon, brought in on a big deal from San Francisco a couple off seasons ago, has yet to replicate that success in New York, but a couple really solid starts for him down the stretch last year. Max Fried, the big offseason acquisition here, projected a 3.42 ERA and a 3.4 WAR. He'll be slotted to start the second game of the season. Marcus Stroman, in trade rumors all offseason. Thank God the Yankees didn't trade him because they really could use his rotation depth right now. He'll be the 3 starter. Will Warren, very good rookie. Really good minor league numbers for him, a guy I'm really excited to talk about. And then Carlos Carrasco, I'm not going to do the deep dive on him because I'm going to talk about Clarke Schmidt. But Carrasco, a vet, a guy that's been around for a very long time with Cleveland, the Mets, had a very solid spring training, got a lot of his stuff back, and I think will be a solid 5 here to open up the season. I'll talk about Clarke Schmidt later. JT Brubaker and Clayton Beeter will also contribute to this rotation. A pretty gross top 5 in this bullpen here. Devin Williams, the best closer in baseball, brought in from Milwaukee. Luke Weaver, incredible season from him last year. Can't even be overstated how much he meant to this team. Fernando Cruz, brought in from Cincinnati, a lot of good metrics for him last year. Tim Hill, never really going to strike anybody out, but a big-time lefty, pitched some big-time innings for this team. Mark Leiter Jr. brought over in a trade with Chicago, kind of a mixed bag for him in New York, but I think he'll have a solid season. Yoendrys Gomez hasn't pitched much in the majors yet, a pretty young guy here. Yerry De Los Santos projected a 4.24 ERA this season, and then Ryan Yarbrough, that lefty, brought in on a 1-year deal, projected to make this bullpen as the long relief option. Might start some games for the Yankees down the stretch. Before I go into the breakdowns, go over some numbers really quickly. All of the percentile ranks are going to be run values by Baseball Savant. On the Baseball Savant card, a lot of metrics for defense, base running, hard hit rates, plate discipline, and then some expected stats. On the player card, weighted runs created plus, again, league average is 100. WOBA stands for weighted on base average, a better way of measuring how you get on base. In this calculation, everything is weighed differently, so a homer is weighed more than a triple, etc. League average for that stat is 310. And we'll get it started here with Austin Wells, a big-time prospect in this organization, brought up through the ranks and a really solid catcher. Had a few very good months for the Yankees last season. And a lot of the metrics did really like his year. Really solid walk rates for him. That's a really big positive. And a big time framer behind the plate. That led him to be 96th percentile in defensive run value last year. A really solid on base guy, even though his average is really low, gets on base at a pretty good clip because he walks a lot. and he's going to be the leadoff hitter for this team against right-handed pitching. I mentioned a really good middle of the season for Wells, and that was definitely the case. 942 OPS in July, 936 in August, 769 in June. Those were just bookended by a tough April and May of 593 OPS and a 548, and then a 411 in September. But a guy that underperformed a lot of his metrics by a pretty solid margin last year, and a super high floor player because of what he brings defensively, hits the ball pretty hard. The K rate isn't a big issue. I think we see a pretty big step from Austin Wells in 2025. The biggest issue for him is his struggles against left-handed pitching in the majors. Last season, just a 526 OPS against lefties with a 761 against righties. Wasn't really given the opportunity to hit against them very often, only 77 plate appearances. But in the minors, that was never really a struggle for him. An 800 OPS against lefties in 23, a 780 in 2022. So I think Wells has it in him to be a solid hitter against both sides. And then an awesome story, a guy who hasn't played in the majors yet but is 29 years old, in JC Escarra. Was reading a little bit about him. He was driving Uber, he was substitute teaching to make ends meet in the offseason, and he's finally getting his chance. A really good year in the minors last year, 19% better than league average. A very good spring for JC, and he's gonna make this team. In this spring training, 53 at-bats, a 302 average, and an 848 OPS with 3 homers, so he definitely earned his way onto this team. Graded out as a solid defender in the minor leagues, although I think Wells is a pretty decent amount better. Kind of interesting, the Yankees deciding to carry 2 left-handed bats at the catcher position, but I think they really do believe in Austin Wells to be a full-time contributor here. I would expect Wells to get most of the games this season behind the plate. Paul Goldschmidt, welcome to the Bronx, former National League Most Valuable Player, a league average hitter last season with 100 weighted runs created plus, still 22 homers and 11 stolen bases in 154 games. And even though the numbers overall were down, a guy that still hit left-handed pitching very well, and those hard hit rates are still really good for him. 92nd percentile in hard hit percentage. The barrel rates and average exit velocities are all really solid. Last season, about a league average defender at first base, 47th percentile in defensive run value, and right in the middle in outs above average. Yankees are definitely booking on a bounce back season from Goldie, and I think there's a lot to be excited for. The past 2 seasons before this for Goldschmidt, an 810 and a 982 OPS in that 2022 season, 25 and 35 homers in those 2 years as well. The metrics aren't much different for Goldschmidt. Did take a bit of a step back in a decent amount of the hard hit categories, but not a huge step back. The really only thing that I'm worried about with Goldschmidt is his walk rate went down by a pretty significant margin last year, but a lot of that you can attribute to a pretty tough first half as well. A 664 OPS in the first half, a 799 in the second half. If the Yankees can get that second half Paul Goldschmidt for the entire season, I think they would be very happy with this 1-year deal. But if nothing, a pretty high floor bat against left-handed pitching and a guy that can really do some things in this clubhouse, big-time veteran. Paul Goldschmidt brought in to be this first baseman, a former National League MVP. Pretty excited about the season that Jazz Chisholm Jr. could have in New York this year. A 4.5 WAR player per 162 the past 3 seasons. Just 27 years old. 24 homers and 40 stolen bases for him, so he brings a lot of athleticism to this team. 92nd percentile in base running run value, and even though he was playing out of position last year, 84th percentile in defensive run value. Obviously, vibes are not quantifiable in baseball, but man, Jazz brings a lot of swag to this team as well, and regardless of if it helps or not, I'm just a big fan of what he does for the game. A guy who in the past has had some pretty crazy hard hit numbers, a 2022 season with an 860 OPS, but only 241 plate appearances. A guy that really has had some bad injury luck the 23 and 22 years, missed a majority of both of those seasons, but really took a step forward in a lot of the plate discipline metrics last year, and I think that's definitely a really good sign for him. Also, he played very well when he came over to the Yankees, an 825 OPS in 46 games here. A guy who's really bounced around positions his entire career, played a lot of center field, played a lot of shortstop, played a lot of third base last year, graded out really well at third base. In 2022, graded out pretty good at second as well, so I think we could see a good season from him defensively. But again, an incredible athlete, a really solid bat to add to this lineup. Overperformed a couple of his metrics last year, but I think he did really benefit from the stadium, and I think a guy who's going to have a really good season here in the Bronx. Oswaldo Cabrera currently penciled in to be the third baseman on this team. 88 weighted runs created plus last year, so 12% worse than league average offensively. Kind of had to pick his spots, though. He was coming in off the bench a decent amount of time and never really had a full position in the majors. A switch hitter, but really a left-handed bat. A guy that will actually take some left-on-left matchups and will only use his right side against very advantageous pitchers. Not really sure what it is for him. I haven't really been able to figure it out, but he definitely really trusts his left side at the plate a lot more. A guy that has some solid metrics, is pretty good defensively, and doesn't strike out a lot. The whiff rates are really solid for him. A guy that squares the ball up a decent amount, just doesn't really hit the ball very hard. He took a really big step, though, from a tough 2023 season, a 574 OPS and 330 plate appearances. But I'll say it again, a 26-year-old that has never really had a position in the majors, really been playing everywhere defensively. Throughout his career, games at first base, second base, third base, shortstop, right field, and left field. Has graded out with plus outs above average every time he's been at third base, so I think that's a good position for him. And I think the Yankees are excited about what Waldo can do at third base this year, hoping he can take a bit of a step forward with his bat. A 735 OPS and 58 spring training appearances for him this year, and seemingly has won this third base job, at least for now. So this is a pretty polarizing one, seemingly for a lot of Yankee fans, but Anthony Volpe, the shortstop here, I personally am a big fan of a lot of the things that he can bring to the table. Big time defender at shortstop and incredible base runner as well, and those are two things that you can't really overstate, but has really been one of the worst hitters in the league the past 2 years overall since he's been up. Just 4th percentile in offensive run value last year. A lot of the metrics really ticked down for him. Kind of changed his approach at the plate seemingly. In 2024 was going for a lot more average on base. In 2023, going for a lot more home runs, had more homers that season, was hitting the ball harder. But a guy that was an incredible minor league baseball player, a career 881 OPS in the minors. In 2022, his last year down there, 132 games and 21 homers. Did struggle just a bit against upper level pitching in 2022, 22 games at AAA, a 717 OPS. The last 2 years, a 657 and a 666 OPS in the majors, 2 full seasons for him. You gotta mention the playoffs with Volpe too, because he was great last year at 815 OPS, a 407 on base in 59 plate appearances. He was hitting the ball harder than he ever has. He was swinging the bat harder than he ever has. Really took a step forward in that regard. Seemingly the bat speed is also closer to that postseason level in spring training this year, so I think that's something he can carry into the season. Anthony Volpe is only 23 years old, a former top prospect for this team and a guy who's been great in the minor leagues, just has yet to get it going in the majors offensively, but a super high floor player, brings a lot on the defensive and base running sides. Jasson Dominguez, the number 1 prospect in this organization and gonna be the starting left fielder on opening day, a big time prospect, a guy that's been talked about for several years and only 22 years old, only 18 games last year. He had Tommy John surgery and missed a majority of the season in the majors, did play a decent amount in AAA last year. I'll go over some of those numbers in a second, but some really good metrics when he's been up in the majors. Really like the bat speed that you see from him. He's always had really solid hard hit rates in his very limited sample, and the walk rate in his 18 games last year was crazy. If he can keep that level of plate discipline, although I know it won't be close to that over a full season, you feel really good about what Jasson Dominguez can be as a player. Just 100 plate appearances in the major leagues, a 747 OPS overall, but a great 2023 that he got off to before the injury. The hard hit metrics in that 33 plate appearance sample are just laughable. All of the hard hit numbers are literally off the page. Last season in the minors for Dominguez, 58 games at 880 OPS. The season before that, 118 games at 802 OPS and 15 homers. Dominguez has been great everywhere he's been offensively. It's been a bit tough for him metrically in the majors in terms of his defense, and it hasn't looked great in spring training either. I think the struggles are just a bit overstated with him, though. I think he can be closer to an average defender, and if he can really show his bat at the plate, really excited for the player that Jasson Dominguez can be. The Yankees welcome Cody Bellinger to the Bronx to be their full-time center fielder, and it is going to be a welcome addition to this team. Really solid in every area last year. The base running is very good for Bellinger. 9% better than league average offensively, 18 homers in 130 games. The metrics for him aren't great, but really switched his approach the past couple years, and that's really helped him be a different hitter. Early in his career with the Dodgers, more of an all-or-nothing power guy, a really good swing, but definitely had some holes in it, and that really got exposed over his last couple of years with the Dodgers. Some of the tougher seasons that you'll see a major league player have. Got to Chicago and completely switched it up. 2 solid seasons offensively, but a high floor player, a solid defender in center, a good base runner, and had really good plate discipline numbers last year. Pretty similar metrics offensively to his 2023 season where he had an 881 OPS and 26 homers. I think the biggest thing for him, he wasn't hitting the ball in the air as much last year. The launch angle sweet spot percentage went from 86th percentile in baseball all the way down to 34th percentile. So some of the hard hit metrics actually did go up a little bit, but his expected stats went down. Took a bit of a step back defensively in 2024, but it's not something I'm necessarily worried about with him. A guy that's been a pretty solid defender for a majority of his career. And he was a league average defender in center field in 2024. In 2023, 2 outs above average in center. So that's something I think he can really be a positive with, and it's definitely going to be a lot better than the center field defense last year. A much more rangy outfielder in Cody Bellinger, but another big addition to this team, and someone that I think is going to help them be more athletic and more versatile as a team. Look at that baseball savant page, man. 100th percentile in hard hit rate, barrel rate, average exit velocity, expected slugging, and expected WOBA last season. 100th percentile in offensive run value, 218 weighted runs created plus. Yes, 218, meaning that Judge was 118% better than a league average hitter last season. 58 homers, 10.4 WAR per 162 the last 3 seasons, 158 games for Judge last year, a 476 WOBA. This is probably the best season we've seen from a right-handed hitter ever. And even though the defense wasn't great last year, a guy that put up 10 plus WAR as a below average defender in center field. He hits both sides of the ball pretty crazy. Really his only issue at the plate is the whiff and strikeout rates, but when you're hitting the ball like this, who cares how much you strike out? I understand it got very loud for Judge in October, a lot of strikeouts in early series, but you just can't overlook how good of a player Aaron Judge is. This is one of the premier hitters of our entire generation. Even with the early struggles in the playoffs, still a 752 OPS and 3 homers. Did strike out in over 30% of his plate appearances, so that's definitely something to monitor, but only 64 plate appearances. I'm never going to take that small of a sample over what we've seen from Aaron Judge the past 3 years. I think he's the best hitter in baseball, unquestionably. A pretty insane sentence I'm about to say. He broke the home run record in the American League in 2022, and he came back this year and had a better season offensively, even though he didn't hit as many homers. The dude's just an animal at the plate, moving to a better position for him also in right field this year, where he's graded out positively a majority of his career. If Judge could stay healthy the entire season, expect him to be the MVP again. I mean, this is just the best hitter in baseball. He'll strike out here and there, yeah, but he hits the ball better than anybody in recent memory. Aaron Judge, one of the best players in baseball. Going to be a Hall of Famer someday. And then Ben Rice. I actually really like Ben Rice. I think he's going to have a good season this year. He's been pretty heavily below league average as a hitter and compared to replacement level, but he's underperformed his expected stats by a very significant margin in the major leagues. The expected WOBA, almost an 80-point difference from last year. I think he's going to really step forward this season. Look for him to have a pretty big role on this team against right-handed hitters. Kind of a positionless guy at this point in his career. Came up as a catcher, played some first base last year. Not really certain what the Yankees plan is for him long term, but I think he can still catch. He caught a little bit in spring training. So if Wells ever goes down, maybe Rice could move back there. Rice went nuts in the minor leagues last year. 79 games, a 967 OPS, a career 935 OPS in the minors. I'm telling you, you don't just run into those numbers. This guy is a professional hitter. Last season, 24 homers in just 79 games in the minor leagues. Expect Ben Rice to play a pretty big role in what the Yankees are doing moving forward offensively. I think he's a heck of a player, and I think he's very underrated by a lot of circles because of the actual numbers he got last year. He was really out there crushing the baseball. I'm recording this video before rosters are completely finalized, but it sounds like Oswald Peraza is going to make this team. If not, I'll still go over him. Very good minor league hitter, a solid defender, just has never really gotten a big time opportunity in the majors and hasn't really been great here either. Last season in the minors was also a bit of a step back for him. He was about a league average hitter, 16 homers, 25 steals for him. for him. Still in competition for that third base job over the long period, only 24 years old. Expect Peraza to play a bit of a part for the Yankees this year. Pablo Reyes, big-time minor league performer last year and really hits left-handed pitching well. He's going to be in the lineup here against lefties a decent amount. Expect him to take some DH days there, but also can play the infield. And then Trent Grisham, a guy who's been pretty solid in the past, a really good outfielder, will run into a home run here and there. Some good hard hit numbers for him, just didn't really get a big-time opportunity off this bench. Boone really likes to roll with his starters. And kind of a tough year for him, although he did have some pretty big homers. Expect a majority of the contributions on the offensive side of the ball to come from the starting nine. We'll go into the pitching section of this video, start with Carlos Rodon. I'll go over some of the numbers really quickly. On the card, FIP stands for Fielding Independent Pitching. Just think about it as something that predicts ERA over a big sample, so we would have expected Carlos Rodon's ERA to be closer to 4.39 last season. Stuff Plus and Location Plus, two models built by Eno Saris at Fangraphs, do a very good job at showing how good a pitcher's stuff is and how good they are at locating their pitches. League average for both of those stats are 100, works the exact same as weighted runs created plus. I'll have the pitches it throws, the miles per hour on those pitches on the bottom left. On the Baseball Savant card, going to be the exact same stuff. And then the percentiles are run values, again, pitching run value, fastball run value, breaking run value, and off-speed run value. And we'll get started with Carlos Rodon. I mentioned brought over here on a pretty sizable contract a couple off seasons ago. An up and down season for him, definitely. A 4 ERA about. Really good stuff for Rodon. That's never been the question. He's just really struggled at locating his pitches, and that's really came back to bite him. Giving up a lot of barrels. The home run per 9 number is very high for him. But the slider and curveball were definitely plus pitches. A guy that can be very solid, but has really struggled with a long ball since he's came over to the Yankees. An incredible 2022 season that earned him this contract. A 2.88 ERA in 31 starts. Came over to the Bronx his first year, a 6.85 ERA in 14 games. All of the metrics were way down, wasn't getting any strikeouts, but last season really took a step forward, started throwing a cutter and stopped relying on his four seam and slider as much as he has in the past. I'll also mention a month of June that really tanked his entire season, a 7.76 ERA in 5 starts that month. Rest of the season was pretty solid for him, 2.91 ERA post All-Star, and 2 pretty solid starts in the Cleveland series for Rodon last year. I think he can take a step back to where he was. I think he just needs to stop leaning on his 2-pitch mix as much. That 4-seam fastball has really been getting hit over the past couple seasons. One of the more consistent pitchers in baseball over the past few years, Max Fried, brought in on the biggest deal ever given to a left-handed pitcher, and for good reason. A 3.25 ERA for Fried last year, pretty solid stuff, 103 on the Stuff Plus, does such a good job at limiting hard contact. That average exit velocity, hard hit rate, and barrel rate number is all way up there in the percentile ranks. 95th percentile in pitching run value. The fastball, breaking pitch, and off-speed pitches were all really good for him. Walked a few more guys this season, and I think that had an impact on the bit of a rise in the ERA. It's been a 2.55 and a 2.48 the 2 seasons before this. The walk rate just went down in percentile rankings this year for Fried, and he wasn't generating as many chases or whiffs on his pitches, but a majority of the pitches all looked the same. Never been a super hard thrower, but the fastball velo is relatively similar the past 2 seasons, so not something to be worried about there. Fried's just a baller, man. He's a dog. He goes out there every day. He gives you really solid starts. Missed a decent amount of time in 2023, but the past 2 seasons outside of that, 174.1 and 185.1 innings. Not a big strikeout guy, but a guy that's going to initiate some really soft contact. Really good pitcher here to have as your 2 in Max Fried. Marcus Stroman had a tough season last year in terms of the numbers. 4.31 ERA, a 4.61 FIP. The stuff and location never really been a big thing for him, but the stuff did take a pretty big step back last year. He was second in pitching run value. I will say with Marcus Stroman, a big-time ground ball pitcher. You see he was 84th percentile in ground ball rate last year. I think the defense got a lot better for the Yankees this year, so I think that's a place where he can take a step forward. A guy that's had a pretty solid career, a 3.72 ERA over his entire career, 1458 innings for him. Metrically, he's never been super good. I mentioned a big-time ground ball guy, and I think that's really helped him with his ERA. 3.95 and a 3.50 over the past 2 seasons in Chicago before he came to the Yankees. A guy who's consistently overperformed his expected ERA. I'm going to say it again. A guy that gets the ball on the ground a lot, and I think he will get a bit better with the Yankees defense going up. A guy that switched up his pitch usage a ton last year. A guy who throws 7 pitches over 3% of the time. I can't say I have sky-high hopes for Marcus Stroman next year, but I think if anything, he can get back to that around 4 ERA pitcher that he has been in the past. I think the Yankees are definitely built a lot better for him to be a starter this season. I am so excited about Will Warren making this opening day roster. 25 years old, don't even look at the sample last year, 22.2 innings, the 10.32 ERA, whatever, not very good. The stuff and location for him, though, very solid. He overperformed that ERA by a pretty significant amount in all of the Savant metrics. But regardless of what Will Warren has done in the majors, currently a big-time ranked prospect in his system, let's go over some of his minor league numbers really quickly. It was undoubtedly a tough year for him last year in AAA, a 5.91 ERA at Scranton Wilkes-Barre, but in 2023, a 3.35 ERA in 27 games, 25 starts, 129 innings, 149 strikeouts that year. In 2022, 26 starts, a 3.91 ERA, 125 strikeouts. Has one of the best breaking pitches in the system in recent memory with that sweeper, and he underperformed his expected stats on all of his pitches by a pretty significant margin. Some of them really quickly. The changeup had a 600 WOBA against, a 221 expected WOBA against. The sweeper, a 389 WOBA against. The expected WOBA at 313. I could go over it for all of them, but he really underperformed the metrics that he was getting and has been a solid performer in the minor leagues in the past. The number 5 ranked prospect in the system by MLB Pipeline. I'm really excited for Will Warren to be in this major league rotation, but don't expect it to come without some rookie struggles for him as well. And then Clarke Schmidt, a great season for him last year, 85.1 innings, a 2.85 ERA, 3.58 FIP, currently dealing with a back injury, it sounds like, and he'll be making his return at some point in the season. Big time fun pitch mix guy in Clarke Schmidt, the cutter, sweeper, sinker, and curve a majority of the time. Limited hard contact very well last year, has really good stuff on his pitches, wasn't locating them to a league average level, and I think that's where he could take a step this year. Clarke had a tough 2023 year, but has been great for this team outside of that. The 2.85 last year, a 3.12 in 29 games of 2022. Metrically took a pretty big step forward in almost every area last year. I think Clarke Schmidt's going to have a really solid season when he comes back, and I think a very good 5 to have in this rotation. Man, it absolutely kills me to see Devin Williams in a Yankees cap, but one of the best closers in baseball. 1.25 ERA last year, only 21.2 innings. He was dealing with a back injury earlier in the season, but came back and looked like himself again. He has an unhittable pitch in that changeup. Really tough to hit, I guess, unless you're Pete Alonso, but metrically incredible in almost every single area. Struck out 43.2% of batters last year. He will walk a guy here and there. Not the easiest closer to watch at sometimes because he lets guys on base, but he's going to knock him out a majority of the time. An incredible closer to have in Devin Williams. Luke Weaver was awesome for this team last year. Pitched some big playoff innings, was great down the stretch in the regular season. Converted starter to reliever, ended up being the closer for this team after Clay Holmes really struggled. Was big time on the strikeouts last year, 93rd percentile in K rate, 94th in whiff rate, a 2.89 ERA last year. The 2 seasons before that, majority as a starter, a 6.40 and a 6.56 ERA. Really turned his career around here in New York. Cut out a majority of his pitches and went pretty much 4-seam changeup cutter last year. They were all great for him. Fernando Cruz here is the 7th inning guy. You might look at the ERA and be like, geez, this guy sucks. I'm here to tell you that you are wrong. Fernando Cruz is awesome. 99th percentile in K rate, 99th percentile in whiff rate. Look at the FIP compared to the ERA. We project that ERA to go down so much over a big sample. Cruz undoubtedly does have some hard hit rate issues. He will give up some hard contact and he'll walk a decent amount of guys, but he can get strikeouts with the best of them in baseball. Fernando Cruz is going to have a good season here in New York. Getting into the rest of this bullpen, Tim Hill, not really going to strike out anybody, but so good at limiting hard contact. Was cut from the White Sox last year, came over to the Yankees and pitched some of the biggest playoff innings in the season. Just so good for him. Brought back on a 1-year deal this offseason. Mark Leiter Jr., a big-time junk ball thrower. The splitter, sweeper, and curve going to come in a majority of the time. Not great ERA numbers last year, but the FIP was very good. Metrically, he looks very solid as well. I'm expecting a bounce back here from Mark Leiter Jr. Yoendrys Gomez, really solid ERA numbers for him. Just a lot of walks. Only 11 innings with the Yankees last year. Yerry De Los Santos hasn't pitched in the majors since 2023, but he was so good at limiting hard hit balls that year and getting ground balls. The expected numbers really liked him that year. I think Yerry De Los Santos is really going to fit in this Matt Blake-led pitching system. And then Ryan Yarbrough just brought in on a 1-year deal. Thank you, God, for already having a Yankees profile picture of him. A starter in the past, mostly been a reliever the past couple of years, can be a multi-inning guy. Some really good numbers, limited hard contact with the best of them last year. And if nothing, can give you innings out of this bullpen, a really big tool to have. That'll bring us into the top prospects section of this video. We'll get started with George Lombard Jr., 19 years old, played in spring training this year and actually had some very solid swings. Got up to high A last year after only being 19, was about a league average hitter overall in the minors. Some really solid tools for him: the hit, run, field, and arm at a 55. Number 88 in the top 100 in all of baseball. The 26th overall pick in the 2023 draft class by the Yankees. Split his first full season between low A and high A. I think a very toolsy minor league player and a guy that's going to start to contribute better offensively. Pretty solid defender at shortstop as well. Think he just needs to start making a bit more contact. The strikeout rates were pretty high last year, but I like a lot of what I see in George Lombard Jr. Roderick Arias, the second prospect here. Jasson Dominguez is number 1 in this system, so Arias is going to be number 3 in the Yankee system. Not a top 100 guy, but a very sound prospect. 20 years old, 55 on the Baseball America grade. Got to low A last year and was pretty solid there. 11% better than league average at 349 WOBA. The hit tool is definitely a question with him, but a really gifted defender at shortstop, a plus arm, and really good power. The big international signing in the Yankees 2022 international class, one of the brighter prospects in the Florida Complex League in 2023. I mentioned some good numbers in the minors. Did have 171 strikeouts though last year, the second most in the entire system, but got a lot better as the season went on. I think a guy that's going to stick at shortstop for a majority of his career. We'll see what happens as he goes through the system, but he definitely really needs to work on that hit tool. Got to make a bit more contact, pretty similar to Lombard. His issues, I think, are just a bit bigger at the plate. And then Ben Hess, a guy who didn't pitch last year, but 3 seasons at Alabama, the 26th overall pick in last season's draft. Limited by injuries in 2022 and 2023, but fully healthy in 2024, and a great year for Ben Hess. He can get up to 99 on that fastball, sits about 94, 95. I think that's really his best pitch. Really solid slider, a good changeup, and a curveball that needs a bit of development. But a guy with a bit of a walk issue, can get some strikeouts though. I think definitely one of the bigger project pitching prospects in this top prospect area. A 5.80 ERA in his last season at Alabama. He had just had such good numbers before. He has all of the tools. I think Ben Hess can be a good pitcher. We're going to have to see some good numbers from him in the minor leagues though. We'll go into some notable infield prospects. We'll start here with Rafael Flores, a catcher slash first baseman. I think he projects better at first base long term. Not a great fielder, really no run tool at all, but he can hit for pop, definitely. 55 power tool, 40 on the hit tool, so there are some questions there. But big time exit velocity numbers from Flores. I think needs to develop that hit tool, but if nothing, can hit a lot of homers, big time pop in his bat. Yorbit Vivas involved in a prospect for prospect trade with Trey Sweeney in 2023 from the Dodgers. Really struggled in 2024 after putting up some really good numbers in the minor leagues before this. A really solid arm at second base, a good fielder there. Solid hit tool. His power is nothing of note, but was hurt, actually got hit in the head with a pitch and missed a decent amount of time last season. Kind of a fringy prospect in a lot of areas, but has had some very good numbers in the minors. Edgelin Perez, big time DSL performer his first season, 30 walks and 31 strikeouts down there. One of the better prospects in the Complex League in 2024. Really solid plate discipline from him and a really good hit tool. Not as much power, but I think a solid defender as well. He'll make his full season debut this year. Manny Cedeno, the Yankees consolation prize for not getting Roki Sasaki this offseason. Just 16 years old, a 50 on the Baseball America grade, 55 hit tool, 60 run, 55 arm, has yet to play in the minors, will likely start in the DSL this summer. And then Anglith Urena, signed in 2022 as part of the international class, had yet to really play a full season until 2024, and he was dominant in the Complex League, a 564 slug, a 984 OPS. Think another guy who's a long-term first baseman, but he has a really solid bat, not as many question marks in the strikeout area, will likely start at low A this season. We'll go to the outfielders here, and you got to talk about Spencer Jones, a very toolsy player, a former very high draft pick by the Yankees, 25th overall in 2022. Really solid as a hitter, just has big time swing and miss issues. In zone whiff rates of 40.9 and 32.8 in 2023 and 2024. A big time toolsy guy, just really struggles to make contact. That hit tool is a big question for him. Definitely a guy with some holes in his swing. I think it's fixable though. I think Spencer Jones still has a future ahead of him. He just has to cover up those strikeout issues a bit. Real big power from him and really good in the outfield. Francisco Velorio, an 18-year-old that was in the DSL last year and really impressed. Although the strikeout clip was pretty high, 33% of his plate appearances ended in a strikeout. Definitely another guy with hit tool issues. Very high chase rates for him. He might end up going back to the DSL last year, but definitely some big time tools. That's really a theme of this entire farm system. Everson Pereira had Tommy John surgery last season and missed a majority of the year, but another guy here with pretty big hit tool issues, but very toolsy. Actually got up to the majors in 2023. I think a guy who's a very plus defender, a good runner, and really has some tools. Another guy, though, has to cut out the strikeout rates, 32% in 2024 at AAA. And then Brando Maella, 19 years old in the Complex League last year, really underwhelming statistics after a very good DSL run. Might end up going back there before he makes a trip to A-ball, but some very good tools for him. The run, field, and arm are very solid. Just the strikeouts are kind of an issue. Not as much power as these other guys either. Some really good pitchers in this group. Bryce Cunningham, the number 5 prospect out of Vanderbilt last season, didn't pitch in the minor leagues. A 55 fastball, 55 changeup, and a 50 slider. At Vandy, moved to the rotation full-time last year and struck out 96 over 84.2 innings. 53rd pick in the draft last year, gets up to 99 on that fastball. Some really good stuff for him. Chase Hampton, a very solid minor league pitcher, dealt with some injuries almost the entire year last season, but very good pitch grades for him. The fastball, curveball, slider, and cutter all above a 50. Really good control. I think Chase Hampton can develop into one of the better pitchers in this organization. Just needs to get back to full health after a tough wash of a season last year. Henry LaLane is my favorite guy in this entire system. I've had an eye on him for a pretty long time now. 6'7" lefty with 3 great pitches and really controls them. The fastball, slider, and changeup all at a 60 grade. Only pitched 12.1 innings all year last year, though was dealing with some injuries. Big time ceiling on the lane. Very similar to Chase Hampton and the fact that you gotta try to wash out that entire 2024 season because there really wasn't much there for him. But an incredible 2023 season for LaLane. Expect him to have a good year this season. Brock Selvage, another lefty here, got up to Double-A last season. Ended in July though after he had left biceps inflammation. Another guy here with some really solid pitches. The fastball and slider are both very good, although the changeup and cutter do need a bit of development still. Will most likely start in AAA this year, but 2 solid lefties in LaLane and Selvage. A bunch of other pitchers in this system to talk about, but I'm going to go with Clayton Beeter here. 26 years old, acquired in the Joey Gallo trade to the Dodgers. Pitched in 3 games in the majors last season, but again, another guy that missed a chunk of the season with a shoulder issue last year. My guess is he develops into a multi-inning guy. Most likely not a starter because he really only has 2 developed pitches, but I think somebody that'll contribute to this team as soon as 2025. I'll go over a projected 2028 lineup by Baseball America here, and I will say one thing for the Yankees. I think I'm going to expect this to look really differently. They're a big-time free agent spender, so you can't really be sure what they're going to do. But if trades and free agency weren't a thing, this is what the lineup would most likely look like that year. A lot of Major League experience here in Austin Wells, Ben Rice, Oswaldo Cabrera, Anthony Volpe, Jasson Dominguez, Aaron Judge at 36 years old in right field. Definitely a big-time group of prospects, though, coming up to this system. I like George Lombard Jr. at second base a lot. Like to see those hit tool issues kind of go away a little bit as he moves through the system, but a pretty solid defender and I think would be really good there overall. Volpe I expect to develop into a better hitter over time. I think Dominguez is going to be a star in the majors. Spencer Jones, again, the hit tool is an issue, same with Rafael Flores, but if they can clear that up, if any of these guys can figure that out, they're going to take big leaps forward. Not going to spend a ton of time on this for the Yankees specifically because, like I said, not really expecting this to be the lineup in 2028. It will likely be a lot different with free agent signings and trade acquisitions, but these are some of the guys that could make it up by that year. Projected 2028 rotation and closer here for the Yankees. I took the liberty of adding in Max Fried as the 2-starter because he'll be here on an 8-year contract. This looks like a pretty solid rotation and actually pretty much the same that you're going to get this season. Luis Gil, I didn't spend a lot of time on in this video because he's going to miss a majority of the year, but a very good pitcher, an incredible rookie season for him last year after coming up earlier in his career. But love Luis Gil as a long-term piece if he can get rid of those injury issues. Garrett Cole should be solid still. 37 years old at the time, but pitchers do come back a lot better from Tommy John surgery now that they have in the past. Max Fried, honestly, I think he ages really well as a lefty, not throwing super hard. Carlos Rodon, we'll see how it ends up going for him here with the Yankees. Love Will Warren as the 5-star long-term. I might be the biggest fan in the Will Warren hive. And then they have Ben Hess long-term as the closer. Really interested in seeing how that works out. He has some really solid pitches. A first-round pick last year. Let's see what the Yankees pitching development can do for him. That'll bring me to some final thoughts on the Yankees. I want to say a very different team compared to last year. Their defensive woes really did show up in big moments for them, and they changed their team a lot. Really leaning into getting younger and more athletic, bringing in some pretty solid pieces in Bellinger and Max Fried. This is a much different team. You always expect the Yankees to be in it every year. You have the best hitter in baseball and Aaron Judge on your team. Don't have any questions about the bullpen. I think that's a very solid area. The lineup, by the end of it, maybe a couple questions. Don't know what guys like Oswaldo Cabrera are going to bring. I like the rotation a lot. It is going to be an issue initially with the injuries, but I expect the Yankees to go back to the playoffs. I don't know if they'll be as good as they were last year, but I like this team a lot and the makeup of the roster. Thank you guys for listening to this breakdown. This was a deep dive on the 2025 New York Yankees organization.